I am Maxine Hansen, and I'm the executive assistant to Mrs. Jean Autry Entertainment. This is the 20th Century Television Western Oral History Program, and we're coming from Los Angeles, California. The date is July the 30th, and would you please state your name for me?
My name is Susan McCray.
Thank you. And thank you for your willingness to be interviewed.
It's a pleasure.
So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what entertainment and performers fired your imagination as a youngster?
Oh my. Well, because I lived with music and because I grew up with music, I loved that end of the entertainment business. But what I really loved, because my father had a show in New York when I was a very little girl, I would get to know the actors. And so I got to see them work, and I got to see them feel happiness and disappointment when they didn't get a part and things like that. There was one particular person in that show that I just thought was sensational. I thought she was sexy looking, and I thought, I want to be like her. Most people don't remember this name, but her name was Denise Darcel. Very tall, very foreign lady, and I thought she was the most interesting woman, and she was an actress.
How interesting.
Yes.
What was it about her?
Oh, I thought she had this tremendous charm and great look about her, and I thought, oh, this is just so stunning. Matter of fact, she had a look about her like my mother did, because she wore her hair straight back in a chignon and all of that.
Ah,
Very smart.
good.
Yeah.
Now, you grew up in LA then.
I grew up here. I was born in Chicago, and my family was born in Chicago. But I came out here very early on when my father came out here to start his career.
Good. So now what I want to do at this point is I want to talk about your father.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tell me about your dad.
Oh, wow. My dad was probably one of the most brilliant musicians in the world, to me anyway. He was a fabulous concert pianist, one who probably was the most talented pianist ever to me. He would play morning, noon, and night. He would practice all the time. He was very well known for his Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue performances, which he did at the Hollywood Bowl, and he was under contract to Paramount Studios when we came out from Chicago. Many of the musicians at that time were on staff at the studios, and he was fortunate enough to be hired by what I call his brother, because he was like my brother, my father's brother, Victor Young, who was a great composer, and I call him my Uncle Victor. And Victor was the head of the music department at that time at Paramount. And every great composer would request my father to play in the orchestra when they would do a score. And Victor Young my father was a protege of Victor. And he always wanted to write. He always wanted to, to play the piano for my father was an emotional thing, because if he had to play in front of a large audience, he would get terribly nervous, and until he started to play. And then the nerves subsided. And the funny thing is, years and years later, when Mr. Sinatra and my father worked together, my father made that comment that he just used to feel so nervous, and Mr. Sinatra said, "Me too." And my dad said, "You must be kidding." He said, "No way could you have been." He said, "Absolutely, until I get out there, I'm a wreck." Now, I find that really interesting. I really do. But he said the reason And it was kind of funny. My dad said quite an ego when he replied to hearing, if you're really talented, you become nervous. If you're not talented and you don't care, you don't have any talent.
How interesting.
There you go.
That's interesting. I'm curious that your father, why he made the transition from Chicago to Hollywood.
Well, we first came out here to California, and my dad was working, but both my parents said, oh, we miss Chicago, we miss our home. And my mother called her sister in Chicago, and her sister said, tell Harry not to come back to Chicago because everything is gone. The radio is not as popular. That jobs are very few and far between. Stay there. You're better off to stay there. And we stayed here.
I see. Okay. So now your father, in working for Paramount and the others, did scores. He started scores. Tell me, did you ever watch him, how he would go
Always.
about this? Okay, how did he go about it? I mean, did he have a script? How did he do this?
Well, he would receive a script, but if a producer wanted him to write the music for his film, he would usually show him the film after seeing the script, and he would go in and see the film, and after he would see it, if he was hired, obviously, he would go in there and spot the film, what we call spot it. In other words, where would the music go? Where is the most appropriate place for it to go? He would usually do that with the music editor because she would take notes, and then she would time it so that we would know, or he would know, how long a cue would be, so that it's quite a process because once the cue it's spotted for music, the cue sheets are typed by the music editor. Well, actually, I typed his music. My first job was typing his cue sheets at Paramount. And when I finished typing the cue sheets, I would take them home for him. And so he would get them, and he would start writing to see how long a cue he would have to write. And he would also, he would have to go in every now and then. They didn't have videotapes, and he would have to keep going back to the studio and watch it again a couple of times just to get a feel for it. My dad always felt that if there was a scene that really didn't need music, not every scene needs music. And always producers say, oh, put some music in there. I think it'd be better if that. Most of the time, my dad would say, sometimes a cue is not music at all. You get more of a dramatic feel without a piece of music in a certain scene. And he was right. He was absolutely right. He said, I don't have an ego where I have to have music here. I feel it's not a place. If it's not a place, it's not a place. But he loved to write, and he did very well.
Wow, and so he'd sit at the piano and he would just...
He would. He would sometimes get up in the middle of the night, and he would keep music, the sheets of music, the lines, and he would keep a pencil, or he would draw it himself, the lines, and he would write, because he had perfect pitch and he knew what it sounded like, and he would write the music as he heard it in his head. he'd go back to sleep and he'd get up in the morning, he'd take the piece of paper to the piano and he'd start playing what he thought of.
Oh, that's amazing. And he won the Academy Award for the Franz Liszt movie.
Yes, Song Without End.
Yeah.
And then he was nominated the following year for Fanny, and then the following year for The Singing Nun with Debbie Reynolds. Yes.
And he did Westerns.
He loved
A lot
Westerns.
of Westerns. What was it about Westerns?
He
that
loved it. He loved the feeling of the folklore of the Western. He loved the feel of it, and he felt that it had a great history of this country, and he felt that he wanted to take part in it, to be a part of it. He loved it, and he felt that he could write the most dramatic music with Westerns.
Really?
Yeah.
How interesting.
And as far as my dad was concerned, every character in a Western had to have a theme so that you could recognize who he was or what his storyline was. He had a theme.
It's interesting you say that because I know that I remember Hoss Cartwright, that character. Da, da, he had a theme.
Yes.
And you knew.
Yes.
And it would be in different ones, but that was his
And the
theme.
Cartwrights had a theme that he wrote. Not the Bonanza theme, but the Cartwrights had a theme.
Oh,
Yes.
really?
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
I have my dog here today.
That is totally okay.
Yeah.
Hi there, you can be part of this. Yes, you can.
He's a star, you know.
Yes.
Yes.
You can be the star of this whole thing. Okay, so, and then you were telling me that when there were scenes with, the battles or Native Americans and such, there was a lot of music.
Lot of music. He would come home and he'd say, Susan, that show has wall-to-wall music. Oh, and then one day he'd hear that there was Indians. He knew that if Indians were involved in a story, there was a lot of music. Or the cavalry was coming, lots of music. Get the horn out, lots of music.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Then he'd take his pieces and he'd go to the studio.
Yeah, he'd take his music, he would arrange. He would have an arranger, an orchestrator give the parts of the different, for the different musicians. And each musician would have his own part, and they would rehearse once through. Studio musicians are the greatest musicians because they just look at the music, sit down, and play. I mean, it's just fabulous. My dad was that way too. Absolutely wonderful. And they would sit through and they would run through it. And usually, in the early days, my dad would have to score it through a time clock. They didn't have the film for him to watch as he was scoring like they did later. He would have to watch the time clock. And but later he was so happy he could watch the film as he was scoring it, as he was conducting it.
That's beautiful. Okay, so now, when you were growing up here as a young girl, prior to your career, what was Los Angeles like for you? What was this like?
Well, we lived in Westwood Village, which was not far from UCLA. And when we first moved here, we were in the village itself, right near a department store called Bullock's. And Bullock's, and there was another department store called Fedway. And each one was across the street of each other, but it was Westwood Village. And Westwood Village had little shops, was charming, it was adorable. It was a college town because UCLA was not what it is now. It's huge. So you could walk out from where I lived in our apartment and walk right into the village and go to, they had a little stand, a hot dog stand on the corner, and it was called Orange Julius. And then across the way was 2 movie theaters, the Fox Village and the Bruin Theater, and we would walk to the theaters. Or we would go to Hamburger Hamlet, which was next door to the Bruin Theater. And it was just a wonderful way to live because we never were afraid to walk out at night or walk out during the day. It wasn't crowded. And then it started to grow and grow. I remember the day my dad came home and said, they're building a high-rise on the corner of Westwood Boulevard and Wilshire. It's owned by the Tishmans. It's going to be a high-rise on Wilshire Boulevard. They're tearing down some of the apartment buildings. Then, after that, there was a sorority across the street from our apartment building, and they came to tear it down. And it just became not the Westwood Village anymore. It became a bigger city type of feeling. And it got sad feeling, you know? It got very sad.
Yeah, I understand. Now, you came from a music background, but here you are typing, so you've got the typing in there.
Oh, I'm a great typist.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Well, what made you take the direction of now becoming a musical performer yourself, or doing that?
Well, my father was recording for a company called Monument Records, and his friend Fred Foster owned Monument Records, and they were in Nashville. And he mentioned to Fred, he says, you know the old story. My daughter is just a wonderful singer, and Fred said, oh, I'd love to hear her sometime. I'm coming to Los Angeles, And he came, and my dad said, come on, Susan, get up. And my dad always used to say that to me, Come on, get up. And there was one song that he wanted me to sing all the time. It was written by my Uncle Victor Young, called When I Fall in Love, which became a major hit. But I was the first person to ever sing When I Fall in Love when I was 5 years old.
Oh.
So I would get up. And so my dad sat down and accompanied me for When I Fall in Love. And Fred Foster said, she's wonderful. And I went, oh gosh, thank you very much. And the next thing I knew, my dad got a call from Bobby Weiss, who worked for Fred Foster. They'd like Susan to do some recording. She's got to pick some songs. And I thought, oh my gosh. And there were like 5 different songs that were sent to me, and there were a couple of other songs that were sent to me by another person that I knew. And I selected 6 songs to record, one of which was called Say a Prayer for Michael, which did incredibly well in the Midwest. I was signed to Monument Records, of course, and went on the road with other people who were signed to Monument, like Boots Randolph, Ray Stevens, Roy Orbison was signed to Monument. We just all were together in this group, and it was absolutely great. But I didn't want to be on the road. I didn't like being on the road. I said, if one of my records becomes a hit, I'll go on the road. But I said, I don't really like this. I want to be home. So I came home, and my dad said, Susan, you got to work. You got to do something. And I said, I know. And one of his dearest friends was David Dortort, who was the executive producer of both of those shows. And he was talking to David, and David said, he says, we're building a new entrance to the casting office, and it's going to have a reception area. Maybe Susan could do something like that. And my dad said, well, she's a great typist, because I had been working before I left to record for a company in Beverly Hills called Trans Beacon, who owned and operated Cinerama theaters. How appropriate was that? So I went in for an interview for someone named Kent McCray.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was in charge. Yeah, and so I had to wait in his office. My dad brought me in. I had to wait in his office because he was busy doing something. I don't know. He was always busy doing something. And so I sat down and I waited, and all of a sudden in came this really handsome man. I thought, wow, this is a really nice looking guy. And my dad said, he's a very nice man, this Kent McCray. This is the kind of man someday you should marry. And I said, oh, really? Okay. Nice. And so Kent said, it was very nice to meet you. I think you should go upstairs and meet Dick Larson, who was our representative from NBC. He is the liaison between the studio where we were shooting and the NBC studios. So I went upstairs to see Dick Larson, and Dick Larson said, well, I think this will work out fine. And one thing led to another, and sure enough, I was the receptionist in front of the casting office for High Chaparral, and then Bonanza. I met my first agents that way because underneath my desk was a button that was put there so that if I pressed the button, the door would unlock and the agent could walk into the casting secretary's office. And then she would, in turn, show them into the casting director's office. Well, they all were real nice to me because they wanted me to push the button. And so I got to know all of them very well. And then there was a time when the casting secretary was going to be leaving for another job. And Kent thought, well, you know, Susan's out there in the receptionist, and she knows all these people, and she knows what the gal has been doing. So they asked me to take over for her job, and I did. And I started working on cast lists. I worked for Milt Hammerman, who was the casting director for both shows. He was the best. And he taught me a lot. He taught me, you know, all the ins and outs of making deals and how to do different things. I knew how to send a script. I knew how to break down a script. I knew how to bring in for interviews. I knew how to print up sides and you know, different scenes for different parts. I think, you know, there was a great deal of other things that Milt was able to teach me as far as casting. He always used to say to me, if you can go to a play, you'll always be able to see someone that's not someone that you see all the time on television or in films. You'll see somebody that's either struggling or someone who's really good at their craft who's been working in the theater. And that's what I used to do all the time.
Really? Okay, so
Oh,
you
yeah.
go see plays and see
Oh,
what
yeah.
you can see.
And I would, he would always tell me, if you have time and you can have a general interview, not just for a specific part, but if you can meet as many people, because, you know, pictures and resumes used to come in by, hundreds. And he used to look at every one, and I learned that I had to look at every one, look at the resume, look and see all the plays in theater they did, not just the film work. And he taught me a lot in that way. And so that helped me. And when Milt left to go to Universal because he became vice president of talent at Universal, I thought, oh gosh, I guess I'll be out of work because the new casting director had a secretary that came with him. But then I got a phone call. Susan, Kent McCray. I said, yes. I think what we're going to do, he said, editorial needs a little help upstairs. Why don't you go up there for a while and work? And I said, okay. So I went up there and I saw what they were doing. I thought it was really fascinating, and they were doing all this kind of work in editorial. And then all of a sudden, Kent McCray called, and he said, my production secretary's leaving. I said, you're kidding, Kay's leaving? Yeah, she's leaving. How would you like to be the production secretary? I said, I'd love to. So I went into the production office. I mean, I was able to learn so much. I learned how to do all those call sheets, and I learned how to do production schedules, and I learned how to type all that stuff. And unfortunately, as time went on, Chaparral was canceled and Bonanza was canceled. But one of the production assistants, production manager, I forget what Don Daves was. He was an assistant director in production. He was in production. But anyway, he left to get a job working at Goldwyn Studios. And he said, you want to come with me? And I said, well, what are you going to do? He says, well, I'm going to be in charge of facilities there and stuff. And I said, I don't know if that's for me. Well, try it. So one thing led to another. I went to Goldwyn. I went to somewhere else. And then all of a sudden, I got a phone call if I wanted to be in casting over at Paramount Studios for this group of ladies working for them as an assistant. And they were doing things like Odd Couple, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mannix. And I thought, yeah, I'd like to do those things. So I went over there, I started working on them, and they started giving me a couple of shows here and there to do on my own. And I used to get a phone call from one of the women, and I'm stuck at the hairdresser. Can you go see Gary Marshall and cast that for me? Okay. And I used to do that, and I used to go. And I was casting. And I thought, gosh, this is great. And one day I heard that Little House on the Prairie was looking for a different casting director, because Kent was then working Little House on the Prairie, and they had someone working for that show, and you know, I was working, but I was doing very well working for these ladies, and I got a phone call from Kent McCray again. And he said, you know what? He said, we're looking for a casting director, and I understand that the ladies that you're working for are up for the job. And I said, really? That's wonderful. Then I'll be able to work with you guys. Yeah. But then Kent McCray said, if we're going to hire those ladies and they're going to have you cover the show to cast it, why do we need them? We could hire you alone. I said, oh God, I don't know. I don't know. Well, he said, let me talk to Michael and let me find out. Michael Landon, of course, who I knew from Bonanza and all of that. So he went to Mike, and he said, "What do you think?" And Michael said, "Well, we'll give her a try." So Kent called me and said, "Don't let on to these women that it's you that we're going to go to, because that's not a good thing."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." So I had to go in the next day and play Mickey the Dunce, and they had called Harrison Kleinman and said they're going with someone else. And they mentioned me, but I couldn't say that I knew that. So they called me into the office and said, "Well, Susan, we didn't get the Little House on the Prairie." I said, "Oh, really?" "No." "We know, Susan." And I said, "You know what?" And Pat, the partner, said, "Oh my gosh, she really doesn't know." And Marcia said, "You don't know?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. What do I know? What don't I know?" "They want you." I said, "No way, they don't want me. Come on." "Yes, they do." "Well, you want to talk about an Oscar performance? They honestly believed me every moment of it. But the problem was they refused to hire someone to replace me. I had to look for someone myself because they really were not happy with me. And so until I found someone to replace me, had to cast all the work for them and work for Little House on the Prairie at the same time. And I was fortunately, the offices were close by. One was down the hall, downstairs. One was upstairs. And I finally found someone to replace me who actually worked out beautifully and happened to be the wife of one of the agents who has now become a major player at Universal Studios. And so I started casting. I was petrified, but I started casting on my own.
Let's talk about how you cast something. From the beginning, in other words, do you get a script? Do you get several scripts? What goes on? What is the procedure?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you cast something?
You want me to tell you now?
Yeah.
Okay. When I start to cast, I go in and I get a script. The scripts come out, and I read them. I read one at a time, of course, or maybe a couple at a time, depending on how many scripts I get ahead of time. And in the case of Little House on the Prairie, sometimes I was able to read ahead of time because they were prepared. But I would get a script. I would break it down into parts, how many parts there were. Usually, a script has a description by the writer. I tried not to go with that because I find that it's better to cast. There are two ways to cast something. I call it on the nose casting, which is exactly what the writer says, or offbeat casting, which is totally away from what you expect. I like the offbeat casting myself because I like people to be surprised and not figure, oh, that person's going to look like that or whatever. No, I don't think so. I like people to have an imagination when they look at something. There are times when Michael Landon wrote a script, which was a lot of times, he didn't write description at all. So I had to use, it's like when you sit down and read a book and you have to imagine what that person's character is like when you're reading a book. That's what I would have to do. I used to bring in people, well, first of all, when I broke it down the way I wanted to, I used to bring in different people to interview myself first. Probably, when it came to children, I mean, nobody cast more children than I did. You know that.
Yeah.
Little House on the Prairie, Father Murphy. I did a PBS a special series loaded with children. I had so many. Kent used to come by my office and he would call them the boat people. I mean, they were lined up, sitting on the floor, and I used to love casting them, though. They were just spectacular. And my office was with stuffed animals, a gumball machine, anything that would make them feel comfortable and happy. I am not the kind of person who likes to intimidate people. So I got a better performance out of people without being like that. Anyway, I would bring in probably, unless it was children, I would probably bring in 10 people for myself that I felt were right. I would then break them down to 5 people that I would bring in for the director. I would usually read them ahead of time and give them my direction and how I felt that maybe the director would want to see the part played. Maybe 2 different ways to give them a choice. And after we read them with the director, we would figure out who was the best out of the 5. Or maybe we'd have a callback for the best 2 or 3 and then make the decision. With Michael Landon, it got to a point where we would have to cast in the car with pictures because he was directing as well as producing and acting and writing. So he would not have the time to come up to my office and interview. Or he wouldn't be on the set either because he'd be out on location. Once in a while, I'd go out to location and read people, bring people out there. However, because Kent and I used to drive together with Michael, Kent would pick him up in the morning and drive to work. And so in the car were my pictures, and I would hand them back to the back seat because Michael always wanted to sit in the back seat because we were referred to as Mommy and Poppy. Poppy was sitting in the front seat, and so was Mommy. And and he would sit back there, and he would look at the pictures, and he'd go, yeah, that's good look. Who do you like? I like that. Okay, fine. And we would just go that way. I was very lucky.
Yeah.
Very lucky. And we never had to go through network approval. That was never an issue here. Never. Because every show was beautifully done.
Where did you find your people? I know you went to plays, but did you have like a catalog stable of people that you went, oh?
There were certain agents that I would trust, who I knew would not lead me astray, would not leave me in the lurch, so to speak. Sometimes when there were very small parts, there were a couple of agents who I knew that had actors who were not big guest stars, but were very competent and good actors that I could rely on. There was one time, unfortunately, I must tell you, I know Kent will laugh. Michael used to say to me, if there's a one-liner or a two-line part, I don't need to bring him in to read, for heaven's sake. If you feel that it's right, you just go ahead and give the guy, because usually it's the guy who needs the insurance, who needs the bucks, or whatever you think.
Yeah.
Well, usually it worked out fine, except for this one time. I hired someone whose agent was actually a woman, an older woman who used to be head of casting at Paramount years and years ago, who was now an agent struggling, who had difficulties, and usually her clients had difficulties too. So I would go to her for something like that. And so she sent this one guy in. I had one line. He was supposed to be an officer in a department store, and all he had to say, this little boy had slept in the store overnight. All he had to say was, he slept in the store. That's it. Well, I went down to the set the day that we started, and there he was, looking fine in his wardrobe as a and I could hear, "Can we do it again? Can we do it again?" And I went, "Oh my gosh, Michael, I'm sorry. What is wrong?" I went closer, and I'm hearing, "He slept in the store," and he played it John Wayne to the hilt for this one little line. And I'm dying. And Michael keeps going over and over, and there was really nothing I could do. So then the next day, we had to go to dailies, which is the day after we shoot something, we all look at film that was shot the day before. And I reluctantly went to dailies, and we're all sitting in there, and suddenly the guy comes out with his line, and I go right through. Oh, that's the whole thing. And then after dailies, we went to see a rough cut of this particular scene, the show. And there he was, and there I was, just going through this. And then after the rough cut, we had an answer print, which is when it's all done and there's music and everything is done, and we go to the answer print, and yes, there we were, and you know what I did, right through. And then we had a screening. And in walked, everybody was there. There was press and stuff, because this was a movie of the week that Michael had done called The Loneliest Runner, which was based on his life. And he was a bedwetter, and this was a very dramatic show. Yeah. So I'm sitting in this screening, and I have this cough. And we leave. Now, years go by. I think it was about, 20 years? 15 or 17 years go by. And Michael is directing a show that we're doing. And he says, this thing has one line in it, and get somebody who needs it. And I said, okay. And as he gets up, he's walking to the door, and he turns and says, try to get somebody you don't cough through. I said, are you kidding me?
Great. That is really great.
And so I really, unfortunately, had to read a one-liner ever since then. But these things happen, and there's nothing you could do. And but to get back to it, casting is really an integral part of a show. If you don't have your good actors, you don't have it. I mean, it's just like not having a good script. If you don't have a good script and you don't have a good actor, forget it. I mean, you really are in trouble. I've discovered some really incredible people, wonderful actors who have become very successful. One that comes to mind right now was 12 years old when he appeared in my office, and I took him out to the set to meet Michael, and he grabbed a hold of my hand and he said, "I'm so scared." And I said, "Don't be scared. You're going to be okay." Who is it? Jason Bateman.
Amazing. Just amazing.
And he's a wonderful guy. He's just the best in the whole world and adorable. The same thing happened with another little actress. Who was it? Holy smokes, Shannon Doherty.
Oh.
And Christina Applegate. And all of these people, you know,
Their start is young.
they started young, and I'm very proud of them all. I mean, I just think they've all become so great. Look at Melissa Gilbert. Look at all of these wonderful young actors who came out of Little House.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, did you have to do background too? Did you handle background? Or is that separately done?
That is separate.
That's separately
Extras,
done.
yeah.
Okay. Now, was there times when it was like, we want this actor? This is, I wrote this for, or we want this actor as a guest star. Did you ever have to run into
No,
that?
I usually did that. I usually said, you know, this part is really Art Carney, or this part is really Eli Wallach. And Michael would say, "You're not going to be able to get." Yes.
You got our Carney, didn't you? Yes. Remember that, yeah.
He was fabulous in that Where Pigeons Go to Die. Just
Amazing.
beautiful.
That's amazing.
But yeah, you try to get the best. You know, the only show that really wanted stars was when I cast Hawaii Five-0, the original Hawaii Five-0. And the network was after me to please get as many big names that year as they could. And so at the time, Rossano Brazzi was very big in the films, South Pacific, and I got him. And Gene Simmons, not from Kiss.
No, I know. Who you're
Gene
talking
Simmons, the actress, did a Hawaii Five-0, and Geraldine Page from Broadway Stage and Sweet Bird of Youth, brilliant actress. All those things, you know, were understandable because that's what the network at that time wanted. But when it came to Michael Landon shows, network didn't get involved because they knew that they had good product and they had Michael, and whatever Mike wanted, that was it.
And was there a budget? Did you have to operate on a budget?
Well, we had there were certain amounts that you would, you know, I went by the minimum, what SAG Screen Actors Guild minimum was, and tried to get at least a percentage over that so that the agent, you know, the actor wouldn't have to take out of the minimum wage.
Yeah.
But also there was what we called at the time a top of the show, which was a certain amount that you paid an actor for 7 days. That was it. At that time, I think it was $3,000 for 7 days, wasn't it? 5? Was it? I don't remember that.
4 or 5.
Then it went down, though, unfortunately. It went down. But, yeah, but there was top of the show. And sometimes if I got a bigger name, like Art Carney, of course, we went to the network for more money. And we got it, so,
Good.
yeah.
You carried on with the casting.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start introducing all these other little things like book and radio and all the other little things? Big things, actually. Little.
Well, I felt that, you see, At the University of Hartford, in Hartford, Connecticut, my husband, alma mater, is the Hart School, which is one of the schools as a part of the university. It's comprised of different schools. And he is a regent. He was a regent of the university. And when I got married to Kent, I started to go back to Hartford and back east with him and met all of those people and got involved myself and was asked to be a regent as well, which I was very proud to do. And we would go back every year to regent meetings and things. When we got to know the president of the university, President Walter Harrison, I said to him, you know, I have a lot of memorabilia of my father's work and his Steinway grand piano. And I'd like to donate it to the university. How do you feel about that? Oh my gosh, we'd be honored. And I said, but it's got to have a good space. And they had a big lobby outside of the Hart School as you enter. And it was very dark, very dingy. It had, you know, the old paintings of the original. It was just very dark in there. It kind of looked like a mausoleum, to be honest with you. And I said, you know, I'd like to fix up that space if I can have it, and we could rename it for my father. And I did that. They were very kind to do that. And the place is just beautiful. And it has beautiful history of my father that I wrote, and his memorabilia, and his piano, and all of these things. And it's just wonderful. And we had a dedication there to that, and had the Hartford Symphony, and had Vincent Falcone came because he was a close friend through Frank Sinatra and all of this. At the dedication, the principal of the magnet school, which is on the property of the university, and we became involved with the magnet school, which is another story, said to me, Susan, your father's life would make a wonderful children's book. And I said, yeah, it would. And my father's sister was still alive at the time, and some of the family, and I thought, you know, this would be a wonderful tribute to him to talk about his young life. And so I called it Harry's Piano, and I gave the history of how he got his first piano and his life growing up, and wrote it as a children's book. And it did very well, and I went to different schools and read different parts, and there are certain parts the children laugh and things. And that's how that got started. And there's a CD within, it has two pieces inside of it. One of my father playing one of his first pieces, Pixie Holiday it's called, which he did in one take, and if you hear it, you wonder how in the world that happened, because no one else can play it. It's just incredible. And the other one is a theme from a film that he scored. And both of them are on this CD, and it comes with the book. Then I finished that and got it published, and out it came, and it's great. And then I thought, you know, my mother, when I was a little girl, she and I would mix perfumes. Now, we never, took different scents of this flower and that flower. She would mix different already made perfumes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we would do that because my mother felt that she didn't want to have a fragrance smell like anybody else's. She wanted something different. That's how she was with nail polish. That's how she was with lipstick. Nobody could have the same thing. So Matter of fact, my girlfriends used to come over to the house, and one of them would say, Mrs. Sukman, what lipstick are you wearing? That's beautiful. Oh, my own. So I decided to have my own fragrance. And I call it Nightfall by Susan McCray. And Nightfall is the piece of music that my father wrote for one of his films. And it is a all-natural, no chemical ingredients at all. It is a very fresh-smelling, lovely perfume. And I love it. And it has a beautiful perfume, crystal perfume bottle with crystals on the top. It has the bottle, it has a purse spray, it's going to have in the next few weeks a body lotion and a, what do you call it, a body wash.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
So that people can, I've always been the kind of person that likes to layer your fragrance so that you put one on top of the other. You get out of the bathtub and you have this and this and this, and you top it off with your perfume. It lasts longer, and it smells good. So, and I have a candle, which is a soy candle, and I tell people, to take it and put it in the bathroom, put it somewhere in the house, makes your house smell good.
Oh, how beautiful.
Anyway, so that is my fragrance. And then I started working at a radio station, which was an internet radio station called ksav.org. And I started that with an interview show every week. It was a half-hour interview show called Getting to Know You. And I was there for a few years. And then a friend of mine who I went to school with, I knew from UCLA, who was in radio, who very successful owning radio stations throughout the country, New Mexico, Santa Fe, and in different areas. Anyway, he bought a little radio station in Northern California. And he got a little bit in debt. He wanted new software and new stuff. So he called me. Well, actually, I had called him to interview him because he had a new book out for Getting to Know You. And he said, I've got this radio station now. Would you like to invest in it? I'll give you a percentage of the radio station. I said, yeah, I'd like to own a radio station. So I am part owner of KUNK, the Skunk FM. And it's called the Skunk because of the skunk train in Northern California, which is well known for years. And it's become a very popular station. We have the True Hits channel, it's today's hits. And I do the morning show with him. And I have my Getting to Know You show every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock on the Skunk.
Interesting.
Yes.
So and don't you have a production company, or did you have a production company too?
Well, no, but now I've gotten into advertising. You see,
You're amazing.
You're
amazing.
I kind of had to do it in a way. So I sell advertisers sponsorships for our radio station.
Oh, how interesting.
And I record the commercials, most of them. And I've done, all of that stuff. I have a big following up there. And since we're on the internet, everybody can listen all over the country. As a matter of fact, one of my guests last weekend was Vicki Carr. And she has a tremendous fan club. And they called into the morning show and they said, oh, we listened to Vicki Carr and it was so wonderful. Where are you calling from? Chicago, Denver, Kansas, Nebraska, all over. they hear me.
That's beautiful. So you're very creative. You're
Yes, I
amazingly
am. No,
creative.
I
No, you
tell you,
are.
I
love it.
love what I do.
Yeah.
I love being able to get up. I get up every early morning. I'm on the air from 7 until 10. And is it 10? No, 9. 7 to 9. He's on till 10.
Yeah.
And it's great.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So let's take Little House as an example.
Mm-hmm.
You're casting. Maybe you're casting for somebody who at least has to maybe get in a wagon and do a team or whatever, or at least be in the atmosphere of horses or animals or such. Did you ever have to have an eye in casting that? Did you ever run into trouble with that or anything like that?
You know, at least it's been said so many times, that when a casting director asks for an actor to have the ability to ride a horse, usually an actor will say, oh, sure, I can ride a horse. Because you know they want a part, they want a job. Naturally, I understand that. But when somebody comes in and says, absolutely, I was raised on a ranch, what are you going to say? I mean, you don't have time to take someone out there and test them and show, all that. One time, one of the actors who was cast was out there. He said, absolutely, I was born on a ranch. One of the stunt coordinators said, yeah, he was born on a ranch, all right. It must have been a chicken ranch. He could not ride. He could not. And so we ended up, doubling him. What we have to do usually, because you really can't take a chance on anybody getting hurt or anybody saying, oh yeah, don't worry about it. If it's somebody who feels comfortable on a horse and there isn't some major riding, then great. Sometimes, if you get lucky, and we did get very lucky, you have a stuntman who is an actor. And there have been wonderful ones, really. We had Bob Hoy, who was one of the best stuntmen ever, who was a very nice actor. And people like that you feel comfortable with. And you try to use them, actually, So that was the case. With livestock, usually you have wranglers, you have people who know their business, and Kent always says, let people who have a specialty do their business and stay away from it.
Yeah.
And that's the way you do it,
Good. Now I'm going to ask you one more question. Is there anything that you would like known about you or your profession? For people maybe looking at this 200 years from now. I always say, he's tired of this, what would you have liked to ask Jefferson? Thomas Jefferson.
Well, if there's an actor looking at this, or if there's someone in production looking at this, I would say, don't be an actor if you're an actor. If you are looking for a part, be natural, be yourself. Because the more yourself and not act, the more you're believable. And the more people will want to hire you. Because a good actor will make you cry if it's a scene, a dramatic scene, and a good actor will make you laugh if he's got great comedy timing. If you're natural and you're right for the part, that's where it is.
Good. And is there anything you'd like people to know about you?
About me?
Mm-hmm.
I love what I do. And I think I'm very fortunate in that I can wake up in the morning and say, I can't wait to start working. I can't wait to see what I can do creatively to make this a great day.
That's good. Thank you so much. End of interview.